What happens when a former royal sits down for what should have been a routine late-night talk show appearance, only to face one of the most explosive confrontations in recent television history? Tonight, we examine the shocking events that took place when Meghan Markle appeared on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. What was meant to promote her latest philanthropic project instead turned into a verbal battleground that left the studio audience stunned and network executives scrambling from the moment Meghan stepped onto the Ed Sullivan Theater stage. The tension was unmistakable. Those familiar with the show know Colbert typically balances humor with serious discussion. But sources inside the studio that night described an atmosphere unlike anything they had ever experienced. The usual light pre-interview banter was absent, replaced by what one crew member called an icy politeness that put everyone on edge. Earlier that afternoon, Meghan had attended the standard rehearsal and technical run-through. Multiple sources confirmed that even during these sessions, signs emerged that this would not be a typical celebrity interview. The talking points, carefully coordinated weeks in advance between Meghan's team and the show's producers, shifted drastically in the hours leading up to the taping. What was initially intended as a light-hearted discussion of her charitable work and upcoming projects had evolved into something far more combative. Producers were walking on eggshells all day. Staff members noted a series of closed-door meetings involving Meghan's publicist and legal team, who made demands that went well beyond normal guest requests. They sought to declare certain topics completely off-limits, required pre-approval of specific questions, and even asked for editorial control over how certain segments would be edited. Given that The Late Show typically tapes live-to-tape with minimal editing, these requests created major friction. Stephen Colbert, known for his sharp wit and ability to handle challenging guests, appeared unusually tense during final preparations. According to production sources, he voiced concerns about the growing restrictions on the interview. As someone who built his career on satire and bold questioning, the idea of conducting a heavily sanitized conversation clearly unsettled him. Meanwhile, the audience filing into the theater had no idea they were about to witness television history. They expected the usual mix of comedy, music, and celebrity interviews, unaware that the night would instead deliver a confrontation that would dominate headlines and social media for weeks. Even as Colbert delivered his opening monologue, there were subtle signs that something was off. He hit all his marks, delivering his jokes with professional precision. But those who knew him well noticed a sharper edge to his humor and a less fluid rhythm than usual. Backstage, Meghan's team continued to make last-minute demands, including changes to the set and lighting that the crew found unusual and unnecessarily complex. These adjustments delayed the show's flow and increased the stress among production staff already operating under immense pressure. When the time came to introduce Meghan, an unusual hush filled the theater. The usual excitement before a celebrity entrance was absent, replaced by a charged mix of anticipation and unease. Even the audience seemed to sense that what was about to happen would be far more dramatic than anything they expected. Asterisk. The introduction was delivered with Stephen's usual professionalism, but attentive viewers noticed subtle differences in his style. His words seemed more deliberate than usual, his smile slightly forced, and a trace of tension in his voice suggested he was preparing for something far more difficult than a routine celebrity conversation. As Meghan entered the stage, the audience responded with the expected cheers and applause. She carried herself with her trademark poise and confidence, waving gracefully before taking her seat across from Stephen. Yet even in those opening moments, it was clear this interview would not be typical. The initial greetings were polite and professional, but both host and guest maintained a noticeable distance that contrasted with the show's normally warm atmosphere. Stephen's first questions carried his characteristic charm, but a certain formality lingered, hinting that both knew they were stepping into uncertain ground. The opening minutes stayed within the carefully negotiated script. Stephen asked about Meghan's recent charitable initiatives, and she spoke eloquently about her work in women's empowerment and education. Her answers were polished, shaped by years of media training, and the audience responded warmly. For a moment, it seemed as though the interview might proceed without disruption. Then Stephen began to deviate from the approved topics. His transition was smooth enough that most viewers likely missed the shift, but those sensitive to interview dynamics could feel it. Instead of moving to the next prepared subject, he leaned back with a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes and asked a question that instantly changed the tone. "You've often spoken about your commitment to authenticity. In truth," he said, in a conversational tone that carried a subtle edge. "But in several cases, there seems to be a gap between public statements and documented facts. How do you reconcile that?" The question hung in the air. Meghan's smile faltered briefly before she recovered, but the fleeting crack was telling. Her response was calm. It carried a defensive undertone, absent from her earlier answers. "I think that's a rather loaded question, Stephen," she replied, her voice pleasant but edged with steel. "I've always been committed to speaking my truth, and anyone suggesting otherwise might want to reflect on their own motives for questioning that." The audience shifted uneasily. This was far from the playful banter they expected. Stephen, however, seemed invigorated by her pushback. His instincts as an interviewer sharpened, and he pressed further. "That's exactly the point," he continued, leaning forward. "The phrase 'my truth' suggests there could be multiple versions of the same events. When claims are made and documentation emerges that contradicts them, how do you explain that discrepancy?" Meghan's posture stiffened. The polished, media-savvy persona she had brought on stage began to give way under the pressure of direct challenge. "I find it troubling that you would come at me with such aggressive questioning," she said, her voice rising slightly. "This feels more like an ambush than an interview. I was told we'd be discussing my charitable work and future projects. It's not reopening old issues that have already been addressed." The studio fell into a heavy silence. Even the crew seemed to pause as they realized the exchange had shifted into confrontation. Stephen remained composed, though a determined expression revealed he wasn't backing down. "I understand you may feel blindsided," he replied evenly, "but I believe the audience deserves to hear these questions addressed. You've built a public platform on your personal narrative. When elements of that narrative are challenged, it's only fair they be discussed. That's the essence of journalism." "Journalism," Meghan repeated, her tone laced with disbelief. "Is that what this is? Because it feels more like a hit piece. I came here in good faith, and this is how that's repaid." The tension was now palpable. Audience members exchanged uncertain glances, unsure how to react. In the control room, producers faced a situation no amount of preparation could have anticipated. Stephen's reply was calm but direct. "I think there's a difference between courtesy and accountability. When public figures make claims that shape public discourse, those claims deserve scrutiny. That's not a personal attack. Basic journalistic responsibility." At that, Meghan's composure broke. Her voice carried an unmistakable edge of anger. "You're hiding behind journalism to justify what amounts to character assassination. I came here in good faith to talk about important work I'm doing to make a positive impact. And instead, you're dragging me through a public trial." The escalation was so swift that even experienced television staff struggled to keep up. What had begun as a standard interview was unraveling into something unprecedented for late-night television. Sensing the critical moment, Stephen tried to soften his tone while holding firm. "Look, I'm not trying to put you on trial," he said, more conciliatory. "But it's fair to ask questions when there are inconsistencies in public statements. That isn't personal, it's holding public figures to the same standards as anyone else in the spotlight." But Meghan was no longer receptive. Her usual media polish seemed to vanish under the strain. The same standard. She shot back, her voice cutting through the room. "I don't think you subject other guests to this kind of hostile interrogation. This feels targeted and, frankly, discriminatory. I have to wonder if other factors are influencing the way you're handling this interview." The implication hung heavy in the studio. For the first time, Stephen's expression hardened. His professional mask slipped. "I'm going to stop you right there," he said firmly. "I've been doing this job for a long time. I've interviewed people from every background imaginable. My questions are based on documented facts and credible sources. If you want to address those concerns, I'm glad to do so. But I will not sit here accused of bias when I'm simply doing my job." By now, it was clear neither side would back down. What had started as a discussion of charitable work had become a battle of wills. It's unfolding before a live audience and millions of viewers. The studio was charged with tension. Meghan sat rigid, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, while Stephen remained steady at his desk, determined to press forward. The audience held its breath. Then Meghan spoke, her voice carrying finality. "You know what, Stephen? I think I've heard enough. This entire setup was designed to embarrass me, and I'm not going to sit here and tolerate this any longer." She shifted in her chair, as though preparing to stand, but Stephen pressed on, refusing to let the moment slip. "I understand you're uncomfortable," he said, calm but unwavering. "But walking away doesn't answer the legitimate questions raised here. If there are explanations for these inconsistencies, now would be the time to provide them, not dismiss the conversation entirely." Meghan's retort was sharp. "Inconsistencies? You mean the lies spread about me by people with their own agendas? I won't dignify this circus with more of my time. This is exactly the toxic behavior that drove me away from public life." The irony of that statement, given her presence on the show to maintain a public platform, was not lost on the room. Stephen seized on it immediately. "But you chose to return to public life," he countered, his tone now sharper. "You've written books, given interviews, launched podcasts, accepted speaking engagements. You can't court public attention and then claim immunity from scrutiny. That doesn't work for anyone else, and it shouldn't work for you." That direct challenge broke the last of Meghan's composure. Her mask fell, replaced by raw anger that stunned the audience. "How dare you?" she said, her voice rising to a level that made several in the crowd visibly uneasy. "You have no idea what I've endured, what my family has gone through, and the cost we've paid just to try and live our lives with dignity. This isn't just unprofessional, it's cruel and personal." Stephen's reply was steady but firm. "Nothing I've said has been personal. I've asked questions based on public statements and documented facts. If you see that as an attack, then perhaps the problem isn't with the questions, but with the answers." By this point, it was clear the exchange had reached an impasse. Neither was willing to back down, and the confrontation was spiraling past the usual bounds of television discourse. Meghan rose abruptly, her sudden movement startling the camera crew, who scrambled to adjust their shots. "I'm done with this," she declared, her voice carrying across the studio even without her microphone. "This is not what I agreed to, and I refuse to take part in this kind of character assassination disguised as journalism." The studio froze in silence. In all their years of production, few on the crew had ever seen a guest walk out mid-interview. The audience sat unsettled, the producers facing a crisis with no precedent. Stephen, still composed, attempted to bring the situation back under control. "Meghan, I understand you're upset, but perhaps we could take a breath and continue this in a more constructive way." But Meghan cut him off. "There is no constructive way forward," she said, her voice ringing through the room as she headed for the edge of the set. "This was a setup from the start, and I should have trusted my instincts during rehearsal." Behind the scenes, the stage manager spoke frantically into his headset, coordinating with the control room. Camera operators received conflicting directions, some told to track Meghan's exit. Others told to stay on Stephen. Stephen made one final attempt to salvage the conversation. "If you have concerns about the questions or the format, we can address those," he said as she moved away. But walking out doesn't resolve anything, nor does it address the issues we've raised. Meghan stopped at the edge of the stage, turning back with a look that mixed anger with visible hurt. "The only issue here is your belief that you have the right to humiliate me publicly. I came here as a courtesy, and this is how you've chosen to respond." What followed would become the most replayed moment in late-night television. Instead of leaving quietly, Meghan turned to the audience, projecting her voice with practiced precision. "I want you all to know this is not what was promised. You came expecting entertainment, and instead you've been forced into a public ambush. This is not what respectful discourse in media should look like." The crowd's response was divided. Some clapped, though whether in solidarity or simply out of instinct was unclear. Others sat in silence, unsure how to react, realizing the situation was slipping beyond recovery. Stephen stood, addressing both Meghan and the audience. "I respect your right to leave if you feel uncomfortable," he said firmly. "But I also have a responsibility to my audience and to journalistic standards. The questions I asked were legitimate, based on information already in the public domain. If that causes discomfort, I understand, but I won't apologize for doing my job." The confrontation crystallized into a single defining moment. Meghan, committed to leaving, delivered her final words with sharp finality. "If this is what you call journalism, then journalism is dead. I came here in good faith, and I'm leaving with my integrity intact, which is more than I can say for this show." With that, she walked off, leaving behind a stunned audience, a shaken crew, and a host who had just presided over one of the most explosive interviews in late-night history. What followed in the studio was chaos. Stephen alone at his desk, cameras still rolling, the audience uncertain whether to clap, laugh, or remain silent. The producers scrambled to figure out how to fill the remainder of the show. What you've just heard is a full account of one of television's most dramatic confrontations. Clash between two strong-willed personalities that spiraled far beyond what either expected. The fallout would continue for weeks. But the raw drama of that night at the Ed Sullivan Theater would be remembered as a defining moment in both of their careers.